Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding a fantasy-themed football simulation. More specifically, I'd like to talk about team names. There's going to be one human-controlled team and several computer-controlled teams. And the computer-controlled teams are going to need team names, of course. And the player might also want the program to suggest a name for their own team in case they're not feeling inspired. But certainly there will need to be some names randomly generated. So I've thought about how to do that. I've used a technique that I've often used in this series or on this channel, and I'll show you what I've done. So here we have a program which just generates some random team names. We have Old Tullylip, that sounds like a place name, The Witch's Skull, Hampforth Way United, Ken Carden, the new Hartlepool Heath Queens, and we can just reset and get some more. New Firrood Hill, The Shepherd's Return, Stanburn Lepers, Old Shipclare Rats and the Corgate Way Swans, and so on. So it's a sort of mixture of sort of pseudo place names that are meant to sound, I guess, basically English. And then there's some of them are sort of combinations of place names and mascots and so on. So how do we do this? Well, let's look at the code. As I said, I've used this technique several times. It's very similar to the game Mad Libs, where you have a series of lists. So I have a list of adjectives: dead, bloody, weeping, red, etc. I have a list of beings: tanner, blacksmith, cutthroat, lamb, shepherd, leper, etc. I have a list of objects. Place names works in a little bit more complicated a way, but we'll get to that in a second. And then you have a sort of master list, a list of structures. So a team could be the adjective beings, so they might be the bloody widows, for example. The being's object, they might be the rabbit's revenge. Some of these objects are not actual nouns, but they function grammatically as objects. So it's got things like crown and rope, but it's also got abstractions like revenge and farewell. They're not actually objects, but they grammatically can be treated as that. The team might just be a place name, or it might be a place name and a being. So you might have the Hartlepool Cutthroats, something like that. And all we do, as you can see, this initialize page, it's just a list of these elements, with the complexity that place names is actually 3 separate lists, and I'll show you how that works in a second. And then the normal note that Z and Y are used as temporary variables. And then we go to generate. And it's quite straightforward. First, we pick a format. We set A equals $form. $form is is this array here. And what's the number of form? Well, it's a random number from 0 to form.length minus 1. So what it does is it looks at form. It says, well, there's 4 objects or 4 pieces of text in that array, so I'll generate a random number from 0 to 3, and that just means it'll be one of these. So A will, at the start, it might be the square bracket being square brackets object, or it might be any of these other 3. Of course, that's no good. It's no good to print it out like that. We need to replace these things in square brackets with elements from the relevant array. So that's what we do. We replace adjective, being, and object. There's 3 commands here. They all work the same way. Set A equals $A.replace. So the format of this is we set A equal to A.replace. Now what that means is take A and replace the first instance of whatever's first in the bracket with whatever's second in the bracket. And what's first and second in the bracket? Well, It's the name of one of these lists, so adjective, and then later it'll be being, and then later it'll be object. And what do we replace it with? Well, we replace it with something from the array of the same name. And which object or which element of the array? Well, it's a random number. Sorry, my M key's not working, so I'll just skip that. And it goes from 0 to adjective.length -1. So again, if there's 10 elements in the array, they will be numbered 0 to 9, so it will generate a number from 0 to 9. If it's 100 objects in the array, if I add objects to the array later or take them away, I don't have to alter this command because it'll always just look at the length of the array and choose a random member of that array. So adjective, being, and object all work in exactly the same way, just using different arrays, of course. Place is a bit more complicated because we have place first and place second, which are two separate arrays, and then we might have place third after a space. So let me give you an example of how that works. So here's place first, so it's something like Bally Blaine, or Rocheburn, Rochebury, Rochecarden, etc. What I did is I actually just went to a Wikipedia page which had a list of common elements in British place names, and I found the ones that appealed to me and put them in either the first or the last based on sort of what sounded best. Often they could be in either, but you sort of have to pick one, because if you put it in both, you might get something like Burn or Berry or something like that, and that doesn't sound very good. And then the third element, place third, the one that's only there half the time, is stuff like field, glen, towers, town, way, place, etc. So you might have, for example, Tully Cliff Road, and that could be that, you know, in the fiction of the game, maybe that's where their stadium is. So Tully Cliff Road. And then we have some special cases. There's a 1 in 12 chance that it's something like Old Tully Cliff Road, because that's often sometimes when you have two things of the same name, they get called Old something and New something. And then you have a similar chance of it being New something. And we have a 1 in 6 chance that the end of it, it'll be called United. So Tully Cliff Road might become Tully Cliff Road United. And we're storing all that in the temporary variable y, and then at the end we replace place with y. Then there's a couple of things that can go wrong, because as you can see up here, we have being with an S at the end, and we have that same thing here, but not all names form plurals by putting an S on the end. So we might get witches, W-I-T-C-H-S, which is wrong, so we replace that with the correct plural, witches, and similarly we replace hangmans with hangmen. And then finally we print the final result. And that's how we generate team names. Now, you might have spotted a potential problem, and I did notice this a couple of times when I was testing it, and that is what happens if you have teams with sort of a similar name or the same name. What if you have the Tully Road Swans and the something else Swans? That sort of doesn't seem quite as good. So that's what I'm going to do next, probably, is I'm probably going to write some code which stops a given element being used more than once. But that is, well, what I'll be doing in the future. That's what we'll be doing next video. I will leave it here for now. I hope that was useful or interesting for at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.